So again, we're really excited about this conversation today and have an opportunity for two great speakers, Tima Bansal and Barbara Swartzentruber, to talk about the report Turning Point that was just released and to walk us through some of the key findings and recommendations and their own experience in looking at the circular economy on the ground in the city of Guelph, and some perspectives around how do we think about circularity across borders. So first up in this conversation is going to be Tima Bansal. And Tima is a professor of sustainability and strategy at the Ivey Business School. She also founded and continues to direct Ivey's Center on Building Sustainable Value and the Network for Business and Sustainability, a growing network of more than 8,000 researchers and managers from nations around the world committing to advancing sustainable business. She has received significant accolades for her scholarship in business sustainability. In 2019, she was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada. In 2017, she was presented with the Organizations and Natural Environmental Distinguished Scholar Award by the Academy of Management. In 2012, she was awarded a Canada Research Chair to pursue her efforts to make business both profitable and sustainable. In 2008, she was awarded the title of Faculty Pioneer for Academic Leadership by the Aspen Institute, a global forum for business and society headquartered in Washington, D.C. And finally, her research targets the interplay between business strategy and sustainability. Her TEDx talk describes some of her recent ideas. She has published in several top research journals, including the Academy of Management Journal, the Academy of Management Review, Organization Science, and the Strategic Management Journal. She has co-edited 2 books about business and the natural environment. Her research has also been cited in the popular press, including the Globe and Mail, the National Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Guardian, and the Independent. We're very fortunate to have Tima here with us today to walk us through the Turning Point report. Over to you, Tima.
Thanks, Mark. I think academics like to collect titles, so we could have filled up the whole talk. I appreciate that very generous introduction. I'm going to share my screen, and I assume that someone will speak up if they can't see it. It was such a pleasure to be able to chair the expert panel on the circular economy. The CCA, the Council of Canadian Academies, was the one that sponsored the report. And just so you know, the CCA is meant to provide the most recent evidence in support of a specific question that they've been given. And so I'll tell you a bit more about that. But before I tell you about our report specifically, I thought there's some value in speaking about what is circularity so that we all start from the same place. The world is made up of a linear economy in general. So we extract from the earth, we manufacture, and then we dispose of stuff, and that becomes wasted. And so you can see that there's waste actually that happens all throughout the supply chain. What we do in circularity, in a circular economy, is sort of close the loops. The big loop is that we take the stuff that's normally wasted and we put that back into the economy. And that's what most people think about circular economy. So it's recycling, compost, and recovering energy. But then there's small loops along the way that matter. And so you can even just repair stuff, and that makes it more circular. So when Patagonia starts to take back their jackets and repair them, they've contributed to the circular economy. You can share or rent. So when you have Airbnbs or shared car services, that enhances circularity. So you can see that circularity isn't just the big loops. It's about keeping material products in the economy for longer. So we in the panel are comprised of a bunch of academics and industry people and nonprofit people, government people. We had a good time talking about the definition of circularity, and this is where we ended up. It's a systemic approach to production and consumption for living within planetary boundaries. So it's making sure that we decrease our environmental footprint by conserving material resources, reducing energy and water use, and that's important. Energy and water do matter as well, and generating less waste and pollution. So it is really, though, about production and consumption. Environment and Climate Change Canada was the sponsor for this report. And they asked us, what are the potential opportunities and challenges for circular economy in Canada? And we have produced at the end of it 178 pages, a pretty interesting reading. So if you want to keep yourself awake at night, tongue in cheek, this is a report to read, but really is a rich source of data. This is our expert panelists. And like I said, they represent people from all over. And the one that I'm particularly proud of today is Barbara, who will be speaking right after me. And she's got much better, more interesting slides than I do. So stick around for her. I'm going to tell you the final comments, the final things that we found before I build them up into the argument that we're making. The circular economy provides Canada the opportunity to become more environmentally sustainable, socially equitable, and economically successful. In other words, it will help us in every single way, and that's important. There are going to be winners and there's going to be losers, but ultimately Canada will become better off with circular economy. But it requires systems-wide transformation. It requires changes to the way that we consume, the way that we manufacture, the way that we extract, and even the way that Canada and the US interact. Everything has to change. We've already shown some strengths in circularity and major advances, but to go further, we have to make major advances in collaboration, innovation, and better data. So we can't just continue to do business as usual. We need to make changes. Finally, if we are ever going to reach our Paris climate goals and have a low carbon economy in Canada or the US, we need circularity. And so it's key. The two are very related. This is a report. I'm not going to go through all of it, but I want to have you recognize it's downloadable, it's free. And you can learn more about the factors relevant to Canada, the current state, the challenges, the opportunities. There's a lot more here than I'll cover. And I realize that I probably have to move a little bit faster. This is a circularity rate in Canada right now, 6.1%. That means that everything that we produce right now, only 6.1% was in the economy before. That means there's 94% of stuff that's wasted. 94% of value that goes into the environment that doesn't need to. If we continue at this circularity rate, we will increase our material inputs by 40%, that's more extraction, and we will increase our waste by 40% by 2040 in Canada. That will suffocate our economy, it will suffocate our planet and our society, and it creates more inequities. However, if we adopt a higher circularity rate, we will reduce, and this is the EU 27 rate, France's rate, or a net zero rate, we will in every case reduce our material inputs and total waste. And so this is an incredible opportunity for us to move forward. This is modeling that we did for the report. So I encourage you to, if you don't know the numbers, that you take a look at this model because you won't find that elsewhere. So what are the opportunities in Canada? I've already talked about the relationship between the social and environmental issues and greenhouse gas reductions. A just transition. Circularity actually means that people live better. So it will reduce income inequality because a lot of materials that are extracted tend to be in remote areas. And those people tend to have lower socioeconomic status, and so will extract less. We'll also build forward better. And so we build better buildings that will last longer. We build better products that won't go into landfills. So everything is retained better. In business, we will produce new revenue streams. We'll reduce our supply chain risks and we'll implement the industrial symbiosis. And that means that everything will come back into the economy that will generate more revenue. The expert panel was not able to make a decision based on the data that we have about the net effects on employment, but we believe that will be likely positive or neutral. And that's really important to recognize that there's little downside to circular economy other than there will be individuals that will lose and individuals will gain, but the economy in general will gain. Challenges, so why aren't we more linear? Or sorry, why aren't we more circular, given that there's only upside? And that's because we're locked in. We have relationships, supply chain relationships that lead us to the linear economy. And finding new suppliers, new customers, new ways of manufacturing, designing new products is really hard to change. But if we move there, then we will, it's possible to achieve the benefits. The current structure of supply chains and economic incentives may also make a difference. The cost of natural resources, especially in Canada, are so low and natural resources so accessible that we end up going with a linear economy. Why not just buy new or procure new instead of looking for circular when it's cheaper to use virgin resources? Governments find it challenging to align policies and regulations in support of circular economy, and that's partly because we have different levels of government. In Canada, we have municipal governments, we have provincial governments, and we have the federal government. Each layer has a different set of jurisdictions, but not only that, then we have to get harmonization across provinces and even arguably across municipalities. And we know that many corporations spread across many jurisdictions. And so aligning or harmonizing becomes almost intractable. And so we need to find a way for governments to coordinate across jurisdictions. And finally, consumers like new stuff. And as long as we continue to like new stuff and it's affordable, inevitably, the circular economy is hard to achieve. And so people have to be willing to maintain their stuff for longer, to not just replace the siding on their house when it's damaged, but to actually repair the siding in their house. I want to focus a little bit on circular economy and trade, which is really the focus of this group. Right now, Canada is currently reliant on exporting waste and recyclable materials to the exporting generally. And this presents both an opportunity and challenge for Canada to move towards circularity. Canadian mineral resources are relatively cheap. And so we extract a lot and we end up taking the waste and exporting it because it's cheaper for others to take care, it's cheaper for us to export. The US is actually a large source of our exports, especially in e-waste and plastic waste. The US has much better manufacturing capabilities, and so they're taking the e-waste and the plastic waste and upgrading it and reusing it. And I think that we have an opportunity in Canada to actually keep the waste and recyclable materials in Canada, and so we can upcycle them here. We do not have internationally harmonized classifications and standards for waste, secondary raw materials, secondhand goods, end-of-life products, which also presents a barrier. When you look at something even like styrofoam, within or across municipalities, we don't even agree on whether styrofoam can be recycled and whether we even have the facilities to do that. And so if we can't get agreement within Canada across municipalities, moving it across between Canada and the US becomes even more difficult. Eco labels, something that's just a standard, is not the same across the countries. And so we need to harmonize classifications and standards. Our trade relationship between Canada and the US will significantly affect our transition. When we think about the movement of, for example, auto parts and automobiles between Canada and the US, if we can agree on what are reasonable standards across Canada and the US on something like automobiles and auto parts, it will move us much more quickly towards circularity. And much of our population lies at the border. Much of the population in Canada lies at the border with the US. And so there's a huge opportunity for us to have cross-border relationships in material goods than there is within Canadian transportation or borders. And then finally, if we have CE specific provisions and trade agreements, we can also help to advance circular economy, both domestically and globally. And just one example here, even data collection on what is the waste that's being produced with the materials that are going into the manufacturing product processes would really help. So better data would be significant in advancing circularity. Very quickly then, what can governments use to advance circularity? One thing alone can make a huge difference in terms of the system. If government purchases required some level of circularity, it would be a huge impact. Tax policy, of course, taxing not only inputs or extractive resources, so it's more expensive to use virgin, but also taxing waste. Government can also make investments that will help to foster circularity. Regulations can also change so that a certain amount of reuse is required. Data collection, we've talked about that. Trade and international relations, we talked about that, and standards as well. I'm going to skip this slide because my time is running out. So I would encourage you to read The Turning Point. Like I said, is good reading, but more than that, it provides a great baseline level setting of the evidence that we have right now on the circular economy in Canada. That's it for me, and I'm going to stop sharing.
Great. Thanks, Tima, for that wonderful overview of the report. Really timely, really appreciate those findings and those recommendations, particularly as they relate to the trade and the relationship between Canada and the United States in a region like the Great Lakes. Really appreciate that perspective. Next up is Barbara Swartzentruber. Barbara is the Executive Director of the Smart Cities Office at the City of Guelph. As one of the winners of Canada's Smart City Challenge, the City and the County of Wellington are collaborating with public and private sector partners to create Canada's first circular food economy. Building on the principles of a circular economy and leveraging the power of data and technology, they are reimagining a sustainable regional food system that increases access to healthy, nutritious food for all, prevents food loss and waste, and creates circular businesses for an inclusive green economy. Barbara has more than 30 years of experience in public sector innovation at the local, provincial, and national levels in the areas of smart cities, citizen engagement, digital economy, rural broadband, open government, data, and technology. She has taught public policy, community development, and advocacy at several Canadian universities. It's now my great pleasure to welcome Barbara to the conversation, and over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Mark and Tima, for that great introduction. It was inspiring, and it was a delight to be part of the expert panel. So today what I'd like to do is share more about the project that we've undertaken in Guelph, Wellington, and to create a turning point. And it really is, I hope you'll see it as an example of everything that Tima spoke about. So I'd encourage you to think about all of the comments that you heard that the panel made and see if you can see them in this project. There we go. The linear food system, much like the linear economic system that Tima spoke about, really is having a significant impact on the planet. So GHGs, food waste, people that are food insecure, our work in Guelph and Wellington County, which, by the way, is, if you're from afar, Guelph and Wellington, Guelph is a mid-sized city. We have about 125,000 residents. Wellington County that surrounds the city, same number. We have discovered in our research that 1 in 8 residents reported living in a food insecure household. And of course, the food system is a tremendous producer of plastic waste. So our approach to working on the issue of the circular economy was to start with the food system, primarily because that is a tremendous economic sector within our area. And it is really one of those areas that we have rich agricultural farmland. We have significant university presence around. University of Guelph is Canada's food university in many ways. So we had the resources and we had the depth of experience to tackle this, but it is an important economic sector for us. And we really believe that this is one of the leverage points that we can tackle in order to show the path to moving towards a circular economy. Because when you make changes in the food system, you actually impact all of the sustainable development goals, and you impact the environment. You can touch upon the culture of consumption, and you can give people the opportunity to participate in the transition. So our goals were to create new circular businesses and collaborations to increase access to healthy, affordable food, and to increase the value from what we now throw away, all by 2025. And if you look at those goals, you'll see that what we really are focusing on is the quadruple bottom line. So purpose, people, planet, and prosperity. Very much a system-focused transition. It's a whole of community initiative. Over 150 organizations from all sectors of the economy, government, private sector, researchers are involved. It's created a number of unique connections and collaborations. And what it's really done is created a rural urban living lab where all of those sectors can come together and work on projects that can create that system transformation that you really need to have in place if we're going to truly move to a circular economy. So what we've done is look at each part of the food system value chain and designed interventions for each of those. All of those colored dots on the right-hand side of the screen represent our over 50 projects that we have underway in order to learn more about how to create that transition within, to move from a linear to a circular food system. This beautiful diagram is called the Sankey diagram, and it's part of it. It is an analysis of food and waste flow throughout our region. And it really has given us the opportunity to look at that flow and then design interventions for the hotspots where we see a tremendous amount of waste and also opportunity within our system. So I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of those 50 projects within each of the areas of our 3 goals so that you get a flavor of the project. So we worked with public health and with researchers and with all of the sectors in our community to do a food environment assessment, to get that data and that local knowledge, which you'll see as one of the important pieces in the Turning Point report, in order to really understand what the current environment is before we begin to design those transitional interventions. This slide gives you a sense of one of our projects, an urban agriculture challenge, where we funded 10 projects that range from compost to rainwater harvesting to newcomer youth community gardens. This was a way for the communities to start to get involved and also to begin to create new opportunities for growing food that was local and accessible. Our kids gardening kits, we gave away free kits for kids to grow some tomatoes and other kinds of vegetables in their own backyard. And it's really important for people to have the opportunity to participate in this change, because in many ways this is about creating a social movement. You have to think about the demand side of the circular economy, not just the supply side. One of our key partners created something called Groceries from the Seed. This was a pay what you can grocery delivery service. And so if I pay full price for beets and bananas and apples, it means that somebody else can pay, who is food insecure, can pay discounted rates. Through one of our collab processes where we're doing work to bring together the not-for-profit sector and the for-profit sector, they created a partnership with a a new business in Guelph that has created recyclable takeout containers so that those meals and those opportunities that go out to people can be taken back and recycled. So there's no plastic waste involved. If you're going to look at a circular food economy, you need to look at how we produce our food. So there's a project, many projects that we have underway to look at how we can support producers to move to more regenerative practices, because we know that there are many opportunities here to address GHG impacts and to create healthier soil for growing food. On the business side, because really Canada is a country of small and medium-sized enterprises that really drive innovation. We knew that if we worked from this perspective, that we would have the opportunity to make that shift and support businesses and supply chains to become more circular. So we have a number of business accelerator and incubator programs for businesses to participate in. We also have been very much building that business ecosystem that can support each other and create supply chains, but also new secondary markets and economic niches for businesses to make use of and share circular practices. It's really important that this becomes a sustainable venture. So we've created a social finance fund that can support social enterprises and social innovation and businesses as they start to undertake that circular journey. We're seeing a lot of interest in coming back in cooperatives as well. We are now working on moving from food, taking all the learnings that we have around food and starting to look at other sectors. So we've created a zero waste economic transformation lab. One of our first investors in that lab is cooperators, and they're very interested in construction and demolition waste and how we can create secondary markets and divert that waste from landfill. Our third goal is finding more value from waste as a resource. And we have a number of projects here that are really focused on how do you upcycle and first, how do you rescue food byproducts, and then how do you upcycle them? And we're seeing a lot of businesses now growing up that are focused on taking the byproducts from another business, so those commercial waste flows, and creating new business from them. So our resource exchange marketplace, similar to the Council of the Great Lakes marketplace, is really a way of connecting those people that have waste and others that can upcycle or make use of it. We've also been working using technology on our waste trucks, looking at ways in which we can pinpoint organics that are going into the waste trucks that really shouldn't be, so that we can have a clean organics flow that can go back into compost and other things. This is about system change and very much local knowledge and collective action. So as Tima said, data is important. We've created a collaborative data hub with all of our partners. We've created a legacy table, food system resiliency, that has a number of participants from our community that will help design what the future looks like for this project. And as I said before, it really is a movement. We're looking for, continuously looking for ways for people to become involved, residents, stakeholders, interested parties. We connect nationally and internationally with the leaders that are working on circular economy. And this colorful chart gives you a sense of some of our early impacts. We're 2 years into the project. And just in ending, what I want to leave with you is this is entirely possible, and it really is exciting work and an opportunity for other communities as well. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Barb. And thanks for giving us that local perspective on the work you're doing to create a circular economy, but a really important focus on food and food security, food insecurity, which is really, really, really important. Have been following that work for some time now and just really, really impressed with the impact that you've been having over such a short period of time. So thank you for that presentation. Right now, we're very fortunate that we have a bit of time to have a Q&A session. If you do have a question, you'll see a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to type in a question there. I already see one, and I will pose that question to both Tima and Barb. But to kick us off, and I will start with you, Barb. When we think about the circular economy and food at the local level, at the county level, can you, maybe talk a little bit about some of the things that you have been most struck by in terms of that work, that transition to a circular economy, just getting people to think about a circular economy? Where have you seen the biggest challenge, but perhaps the biggest opportunity or the biggest change over the last 2 years in shifting that mindset?
That's a great question. Do you know, surprisingly, it's been from the business community, the small business community. They have been like right ready to start to work on this. They might not use the word circular economy. They'd use sustainability. They'd use social purpose. They'd use meaningful contribution to their community. They're starting to use the word circular economy, but they have been entirely ready to make this transition. We, at the start of the pandemic, wanting to do something sort of quick and supportive for businesses, we created a project where we gave micro grants of $5,000. We thought we'd maybe have 30 businesses. We had over 70 businesses that were interested in helping and thinking about how they could make that transition. So to me, that's actually been the biggest surprise, and it's been quite wonderful to see.
That's great. Thanks, Barb. And maybe this is the next question is both for you and for Tima. But when you look at the work that the city of Guelph is doing, that the county's doing, obviously when we think about circularity, there's a certain amount of change that has to happen, obviously within the city, within the county, but at a much larger geographic scale, a much larger level of the economy. So whether we think about southwestern Ontario or the province or even Canada, across the border into the United States, how are you both thinking about the scaling of that work? Was there, what were some insights that came from the Turning Point report and the conversation that led to the report that maybe helped you think through, like, how do you scale, both from the ground up, but also how does the federal government and the provincial government enable this transition and drive the circular economy from the top down as well, and in order to get that scale? Are there any insights that you can share about how are you already starting to think about where does this go beyond the city of Guelph? Where does this go beyond southwestern Ontario, and perhaps across Canada from a policy or regulatory standpoint? I don't know who wants to take that on first, but I think scale for me is always a big question.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I can start to try to answer that question. People say, well, that's, one local initiative, but this local initiative is really inspiring many others across the country. And I think I'm sure Tima is going to talk about, the panel talked about top down and bottom up. And if you're going to make change, you have to do it in, I believe, in a place-based way. But this work is already starting to echo across local government across Canada. There is a Circular Cities and Regions initiative that is underway that's supporting 15 plus municipalities to think about circular economy plans. They won't all be about food, they'll be about a range of things. So I think that when you start local, you start to see the ripple effects across a supply chain. And I know you also need to start at a federal level, but think about the small amount of money that we receive from the federal government and the impact that that had. So I think there's a role for all levels of government here.
Tima, do you want to take that on as well? Particularly maybe giving us a perspective from business, like how are businesses thinking about this from a local level, but also across their industries, their supply chains that obviously connect across a much larger geography?
As I said in my presentation, I think that's really going to, supply chains have to be completely transformed in order to make circularity work. The one thing that Barb and I agreed on during the panel's discussion was that the circular economy has to start has to be executed locally. It's a regional phenomena. And when you say scaling up, we always think that scale is big. In fact, scale can be achieved, as Barb just said, by repeated activities across different regions. And so the circular economy is really about the natural environment. And then food systems are, in fact, an ideal example of circularity, because if you buy locally, grow locally, use locally, and then compost locally, it really becomes an indication of local. There are some things, though, that you cannot do locally. So mineral extraction. So if you're going to build computers or electronic equipment of some sort, their minerals are only available in some parts of the world. So many companies cannot just rely on the local, that they have to have a mixed supply chain that allows for global and for local. And that's going to change everything. So, Hewlett Packard, HP, we have the chief, I actually don't know her title, but Frances Edmonds is on our panel. And so she does sustainability at HP. And when they're developing computers or printers, whatever it might be, it's about sourcing locally, but then also sourcing globally, and then allowing for that supply chain allowing for the products to come back. There is a really good question, though. Sorry, and I can see the question. So do you mind, Mark, if I go to the first question?
Yeah, I was just going to start with the questions from the audience. So we've got about 15 minutes to take questions from the audience. If you want to start with the first question around how you design in circular economy in reuse and recycling, that would be great.
Yeah, and that fits with what you just said about this top-down, bottom-up piece, is that if we're going to make circular economy work, we need corporations on side. And so that means that they have to design products completely differently, that would source materials locally, would allow for disassembly, and so that the materials at the end of life can go back into the economy. So what does that look like? Right now, for example, I've got my iPad, and it becomes more and more miniaturized, so it becomes harder and harder to disassemble. Now imagine electronics so that they can be disassembled and they become modularized, so that I can just replace pieces of them. That allows the circular economy to take hold. And so by reimagining products so that we design them not for sale, but for the end of life, we actually incorporate circularity right from the get-go. So it changes the way that it changes marketplaces, it changes supply chains, it changes the way that products look. Does that answer the question, Mark?
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I'm starting to see that conversation happening, particularly around batteries for electric vehicles and recovery of rare earths, and it's such a big conversation. So I really appreciate that perspective. The one other question that we have from the audience is actually from one of our board members, Brian Ames, and the question is this: so for plastics, the recycled product that is received is quite often out of spec. I think you mentioned that there is a similar problem with food organics in the garbage. Have you considered the need for better garbage sortation facilities? Who wants to take that on, Tima, Barb?
I can start for sure. And part of the innovation that we're working on is how do you use artificial intelligence and technology to get a better view of what's going into, in our case, the garbage trucks and then eventually a landfill, so that you can feed back to the folks that are generating the garbage what is appropriate, what is not. But we're also working with another pilot that we have is working with the institutional and commercial sector to help them incentivize them to sort their waste, because it's not sorted. Organics aren't sorted out from the rest of the waste streams at the moment. And then how could you build a business model or a cooperative model that would make that a sustainable proposition in the future? So I think there's a lot of interesting work to happen there for sure.
Great. Thank you, Barbara. The next question that we have, I will go to the right to repair one, and I'll ask Tima this question. So where does right to repair work into the circular economy, and how do we influence international companies to agree to this?
That's a really great question. And as I said in my presentation, just repairing can enhance the circular economy. And what the right to repair does, currently, when you have a car, a combustion engine car, you can get that repaired by almost anybody, and especially if it's out of warranty, right? And mechanics know how to do it. Electric cars have shifted the landscape. And so because there's a lot of intellectual property that goes into electric cars, now the companies that build the electric cars require you to go back to them. So they hold the right to repair as opposed to the consumer. As soon as the companies that own the right to repair, and this includes a lot of electronic equipment like Apple, like Tesla, that they then charge a higher price for the right to repair. And they can also ensure that the product are whatever, go out of life, end of life sooner. And so you can see that when the companies own the right to repair, they're incented to allow for faster disposal of the product. Consumers need to own the right to repair. Canada does not have right to repair legislation for the consumer. And so increasingly companies are doing it. The question was asked in an appropriate way in that, how do we incent companies to give up the right to repair? And that's a difficult one because it really does have to come from government, from customer pressure, because companies are always going to be more profitable if they hold the right to repair.
Yeah, great question and great response. I certainly hear this issue time and time again, particularly in the farming and food production sector, and the latest gadgets in terms of the John Deere tractors and this, that, and the other. So it's a really, really important issue that I think really needs to be talked about more than it has been. The next question is relates to, I think, something that you talked about, Barb, and the question is this: is the trend in cupper markets, buy more than two, save some money? Have anyone looked into this, creating wastage as someone will just buy to save? I hope that question's clear. Do you have a sense of where they're coming from? I'm not familiar with cupper markets.
I think they might mean supermarkets.
Supermarkets. It might be a spelling error.
Yeah. Yes. So, what's really interesting is we see the sort of overabundance of food and the over purchasing of food, and then the idea that are people that are food insecure. So we really are trying to work with supermarkets to tackle those issues around waste that happens. There are a number of organizations that are currently working with supermarkets to take surplus food, but this is a question about, as consumers, the over purchasing and the price of food, which are clearly issues. Many of our projects try to address, how do you get affordable, nutritious food to people? How do you help people think about what else can you do with things that are starting to go bad in their fridge? And also, how do you deal with stuff that, actually will end up as food waste? So those are certainly a lot of opportunities that we need to continue to work on, for sure.
And are you seeing some companies that are really leading in this space? Loblaws, Metro. Who's really leading that conversation?
Well, you see some of those apps that have been developed by some of the supermarkets where it's it's food that's almost ready, past the expiry date, or just going to hit the expiry date, and there's an app, come and get this food. And I think you're starting to see those from supermarkets. We're also going to work with some interesting organizations that take a real data-based approach to working with those corporations and doing the matching with the food banks around the kinds of specific foods that are needed. So there's innovation really happening in that area.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Barb. Another question from one of our board members, Brenda Drinkwalter, and it's a tough one. We've been trying to think about this for a while now, but where do you see banks fitting into this overall conversation about driving a circular economy? Obviously, we've got the big banks in Canada, globally. A lot of them are allocating a significant amount of money for sustainable investing, sustainable finance. I often find there's a bit of a disconnect between the capital and sort of the pipeline of projects. Where do you see banks fitting into this conversation and the role that they need to play in mobilizing that capital to aid this transition?
You're right. It's a tough one. And I think that sustainable finance has really been taking off. So the amount of assets that are now under some sort of ESG governance environment, social and governance, high standards, it has just started to explode. And so I've seen numbers as high as 60 or 70%, but I think that there's some biases in those numbers, but nevertheless, you can just tell that banks care much more about ESG risks. And so they're much more likely to analyze the companies in which they're investing. Having said that, does circular economy really fit into what companies are doing and how they're evaluated? I think we're a long ways from that. And so when you think about just carbon emissions, there's scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions. Scope 1 is just what the company emits. Scope 2 has to do with energy, but scope 3 is what's really interesting, is not just what the company emits, but what their suppliers emit. Okay. For most companies now measure and report their scope 1 emissions. And so that's important, but scope 3 is what the circular economy is really about. And yet so few companies report their scope 3 emissions, so therefore there's so little capital that's being invested or being shaped by scope 3 or circular economy emissions.
Yeah.
So
I don't
know. I don't know the answer to that one, Mark, but I think that we're still some ways away to get the capital to follow the circular economy.
Sure. And I would assume that changes in disclosure and how we think about disclosure and materiality and risk will change a bit of that conversation, and that understanding risk and also where those investment opportunities are. I would assume, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Great. Well, just recognizing the time, I think we've got time for 2 more questions. I'm going to go to one that's talking about the food economy, and the question is this: so, does the food future work include public health professionals such as nutritionists and dietitians? Barb, maybe that's a good one for you.
Yes, yeah, they are key. They are leading our healthy, nutritious food table along with other partners, including hospitals and researchers and so on. It's key, and we're soon going to launch a Reimagine Food engagement campaign, and very much our public health folks are interested in how we help people to understand healthy eating, how we connect them with healthy food, physical access, economic access, and so on. So public health is playing a pivotal role for sure in our project.
Okay, great. Let's see, there's one question here on data again. How can we collect the data necessary to facilitate a circular economy while protecting companies' proprietary information? And I've heard that a lot around the development of the Ontario Materials Marketplace, where there's both a risk in terms of giving over the material, and there's sharing information in a way that would allow people to understand ultimately what's available. And I guess on some levels there's some proprietary information within that information. How do we think about that as we create these marketplaces and these exchanges?
I can just say that there's some really interesting international work on data trusts that are public and private sector organizations coming together to share data. When you think about, how do you create the environment for electric cars in the future? Certainly, it's gonna need all those folks to come and share data around a particular particular innovation stream. And so we've been thinking about how do we create a data utility, much like a water utility or a hydro utility, and how do we make sure that data, which is a public good or could be a public good these days, make it available to people. You talk about the farmer who has the John Deere tractor, who then, or any other proprietary software, where they don't own the data, they have to look to get access to it. So this is an important question, and it is something that the people all around the world are trying to figure out how do you do that and address the proprietary question around data.
Great. Tima, did you want to jump in there?
I just want to say there's different levels of data, and we have so little data. And I think what Barb is talking about is almost exchange of data among companies. There's macro level data that we don't even have. Mm-hmm. So how much waste is being produced by companies and what type of waste? So we don't even know what is a percentage of circularity in Canada, because there's so many wastes that aren't being measured. And so I think that there is a very macro level of data that we need to even start with, and government has a big role to play in that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, let's bring this to the close. Before I have one sort of burning question that I want to ask you about the Turning Point report. It was commissioned, if I understand correctly, by Environment and Climate Change Canada. How have they reacted so far to the report, and where do you think where do you think they are going when it comes to circular economy policy and approaches in Canada?
So I will probably only answer the first part of that one, Mark, but I've been really favorably impressed with the degree to which ECCC has been supporting circular economy mandate and the reception of the report. So I think that there is a sincere desire to see circularity move forward by ECCC in Canada. Where they're going, I don't know. It's one of those things that they're being very quiet about, as you can imagine. So
yeah, and it does touch on a whole bunch of different departments like innovation, science, and economic development, and others. So again, this is another whole of government effort like climate change. So it'd be interesting to see where they go. Well, listen, I want to thank you both for being so generous with your time, spending a little bit of time with us, walking us through the Turning Point report. I found it really helpful, insightful, particularly as it relates to thinking about the circular economy across borders with the United States as we get going on trying to build a circular economy in the Great Lakes region, starting with plastics. So thank you for spending some time with us this afternoon. I know that this will probably be the first of many conversations on this topic, and wanted to thank you for joining us as part of our virtual Great Lakes Economic Forum series. If you'd like to learn more about the work that the Council of Great Lakes Region is doing, we've put our website in the chat. We've got the link to the Turning Point report. We've also got the link to the work that Barb is doing with the city of Guelph. So make sure that you get those before we sign off today, and visit those sites and learn more about all that fantastic work that's happening. So thank you from me. Thank you from the Council of the Great Lakes Region. And again, really appreciated your perspectives today. And for everyone else, that brings our webinar to a close today. And stay tuned for more information about upcoming events, particularly our in-person Great Lakes Economic Forum, which we'll be hosting in Chicago from June 26th to 28th. And we're really looking forward to getting back to in-person after 2 years of the pandemic. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And we'll be in touch. Thank you.